So we have finished our Civil War project, and I don't know about you, but after a big project, I am ready for a regular, traditional kind of class, and that's what you're going to get today with class number 48, Reconstruction. And if you were absent, we started out class with an opening thought exercise, and some of you might enjoy this more than others. So Clarenceville has been destroyed. 2% of all people associated with Clarenceville are dead. Now, how would you rebuild, if at all? Now, if you do rebuild, what challenges are associated with that rebuilding? And what opportunities do we have in rebuilding things? How should we treat those who destroyed the building? And everybody's entitled to their opinion, and I divided it up between positive answers and neutral and negative answers. So people who are a little more positive would say, oh my goodness, here's a chance to improve the physical building. Heck, my classroom's been in operation every year since 1957. It could use some gussying up, if you know what I mean. You could fix some of the problems that we face, creating a brand new school. We could address the problems that we had so they don't happen again. A chance to reconfigure our people and our leadership. You could say, oh, let's get rid of that teacher and add a new teacher. Let's keep this teacher, this sort of thing. It's a chance to make a fresh start if you get that. Now, neutral and negative answers, you could say, well, rebuild it identical. Just make it the old way. I feel that's kind of a neutral answer. And some are a little more negative, say, hey, the heck with it. Leave it destroyed. It's not even worth rebuilding it. Or let's get revenge on those who committed the destruction. Okay, so this thinking exercise applies to the Civil War because at this point we have a 4-year war, 620,000 people are dead, 2% of the U.S. population. The South is in ruins in a lot of places after General Sherman. So let's apply it to the Civil War. Should we rebuild and improve the South? What problems led to the Civil War? In this rebuilding, how can we address these problems? Should we just let things be, leave things alone? Or get revenge on the secessionists for the trouble that they caused? And if you go back to 1865, people were feeling all of these things, okay? Like you had an opinion about Clarenceville, people had an opinion about the Civil War. Okay, so the basics. What was Reconstruction? This was the U.S. government's controversial effort to restore the southern states to the Union, essentially becoming one nation again. And it took 11, 12 years. There was a major war. So that's the most basic question. What was Reconstruction? So our starting point at the end of the Civil War, 2/3 of southern shipping is in ruins. Cities, farms, factories, homes are destroyed. There's 4 million ex-slaves asking themselves, okay, now what? Okay, that's a tough question. And unemployment was rampant. And if you have people hurting in the pocketbook, it affects things. You get that, okay? Now, from this Freedmen's Bureau emerged. And this is a government agency from 1865 to 1872. And clothing, medicine, meals to ex-slaves. Try to get them on their feet. And 250,000 plus black people received their first education at Bureau School. And then the question of allocation of land, you know, that was a debatable thing, how much land. So there was this organization attempting to get former slaves on their feet and, ready for the post-Civil War world. Now, from the Reconstruction, 3 plans emerged. President Lincoln's plan, President Johnson's plan, and the Republican Congress's plan. Now, the question I'm posing, which plan would the U.S. follow, and which one do you consider the most well thought out? So President Lincoln's plan, these are the important words. In his second inaugural address, he said, with malice toward none and charity for all. Now, Lincoln could have just pushed the button and said, let's go, run the South back into the Stone Age. He didn't say that. He said the opposite, malice toward none. Hey, it's over. Let's work together. Let's bygones be bygones. And part of his plan was that in former Confederate states, they had to have at least 10% pledge loyalty to the Union, or else they couldn't participate. States had to write a new constitution that abolished slavery, giving pardons to ex-Confederates except for the real higher-ups. And after these were complete, they would hold elections and participate in the Union again. So you can see a very lenient, forgiving plan. However, he did not get to see any plan come to fruition because a month later, he was killed by John Wilkes Booth, an actor, a fairly famous actor, and they were actually targeting President Lincoln, Vice President Johnson, and Secretary of State Seward. I'll tell this story very quickly. The guy who was going to shoot or kill Johnson chickened out, couldn't go through with it. Now, the guy that went after Seward had recently been injured and had a whiplash collar on because of that. And it was night, and he was nervous, and he furiously was thrusting his knife. But the whiplash collar was deflecting the fatal blow, so Seward lived. John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater went through with the assassination pretty seamlessly, where he was eventually caught and killed. So Lincoln is assassinated. So we move on to this guy who is considered by most historians one of the worst, if not the worst, president in U.S. history. A guy named President Andrew Johnson. I say Andrew Johnson because later in history we had President Lyndon Johnson. That's about 100 years from here. So anyway, President Andrew Johnson was a Democrat from Tennessee. He was a senator, and he wanted his plan was even more forgiving to the South. All Southerners pardoned. They didn't need to do the 10% loyalty thing. He wanted to give amnesty to even the highest ranking Confederates. Very, very lenient. However, Johnson still had that heart for the Southern state rights, and he did not want black people to vote. But the 13th Amendment let black men, I should say men because not women, could vote. So he angered Congress. Okay, so Johnson was not a popular guy. Then the third and final plan was the Republicans' congressional plan, and they wanted to punish the Confederacy for the war really harsh. Okay, they wanted to outlaw the black codes that prevented black people from having full rights. They favored full equality for African Americans. Now, President Johnson vetoed it, and then it went back to Congress, and they overrode it, which seldom happens in government. And Johnson and the Republican Congress were not getting along at this point. Okay, and just to reiterate these black codes one more time, black codes restricted black people's right to own property, conduct businesses, buy and lease land, move freely through public spaces. A central element of the black codes were vagrancy laws, where states criminalized men who were out of work. So these guys very well were just trying to find a job, just wandering around looking for work, and they were incarcerated over that. And then they had to go back to penal labor. So these former enslaved guys were just walking around, get incarcerated, and go back to what they were doing. Obviously pretty unethical, pretty shady. Okay, and then let's go back to that Reconstruction plan. They wanted to divide up the South into 5 military districts, okay, and make states draft new constitutions and make sure all black men could vote, and say ex-Confederates could not vote. Okay, and states had to ratify the 14th Amendment. So you can see their idea. Let's divide up the South. Let's bring a military presence. Let's put them under our thumb. Obviously, that didn't go through. Okay, the more lenient plan went through. And going back to President Johnson, he was not a very he didn't think real well, and he got impeached. Okay, and he only made it by one vote because he violated the Tenure of Office Act, because that was an act designed not to just willy-nilly fire high government officials, which he did, and he was saved by one vote. But impeachment hasn't happened very often in U.S. history. So President Johnson was the first to get impeached. He was the closest to being fired for his actions, only one vote. Now, there is a myth. I want to get this myth out of the way. President Nixon resigned in 1974. He was not impeached. Okay, a lot of people think he was. For Watergate, he was not. Okay, now the second man in history to be impeached was Bill Clinton for essentially lying, and then President Trump twice in 2019 and 2021. So impeachment does not happen very often. Okay, so at this point during Reconstruction, the former Union general Ulysses S. Grant won 2 terms, and he was a great general, but not a very good president. Okay, a lot of scandal. He did not do a great job. So we didn't really have that strong political leadership in Johnson and Grant that we probably would have hoped for at the time. But one thing that did come out of the Reconstruction, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, the Civil War amendments, and the 15th Amendment, which was the last of them from 1870, was that no state could deny the right to vote on the basis of race or color. Troops protected blacks as they voted in mass, and we even had our first black senator, Senator Bruce out of Mississippi. And this progress was short-lived. Okay, in historical circles, they called nadir, N-A-D-I-R, where things got better for a while, but then in 1896 things went bad, which I'll get into later. Another result of this Reconstruction time is the Ku Klux Klan started with Nathan Bedford Forrest, and this organization was kind of a backlash against these Reconstruction decisions. And unfortunately, the KKK is still around. You can see here's 1925 in Washington, D.C., and here's Charlottesville in 2017. So there was a backlash in the form of the KKK. Okay, and then as we're nearing the end of Reconstruction, the election of 1876, or the stolen election, we had two guys, Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden. It was a very, very shady sort of thing, okay? So what happened was both sides were dishonest, both sides claimed victory, and what happened was a 15-man electoral commission, okay? Now, bear in mind, Tilden had over 250,000 more votes than Rutherford B. Hayes. But this country you're not picked by straight democracy. It is a republic. So eventually the compromise happened and it ended Reconstruction. The commission ruled 8-7 in favor of Hayes, and both parties compromised. Democrats would accept Hayes if Republicans removed the rest of the troops from the South and appoint a conservative Southerner to his cabinet. And it ended this time of Reconstruction. Okay, now to wrap things up, if you look at Reconstruction, its successes, okay, the good things. The Union restored, the South was repaired. The South began to industrialize, the Civil War amendments were passed, and we saw education for blacks and poor whites for the first time. Now, in terms of failures, blacks remained poor. Many were sharecroppers, which was not that much better than being enslaved, okay? It was better, but not a whole lot, okay? Now, the KKK and Jim Crow laws, these anti-black sort of movements, that was a backlash to Reconstruction happened. Racism was very prevalent still, and the South still lagged behind the North economically, okay? So I know that ran a little bit long, so what I'm going to ask you to do if you are absent is go to Google Classroom, use this PowerPoint, use your book, and answer the questions related to it. And that will wrap up part 5, and we'll do our test taking stuff tomorrow. And that is that. So thank you for watching.